How's everyone getting on? Welcome back to another episode of Quittable and another edition that's below episode 10. And as you know, that means you can still call yourself an OG. So I appreciate you. If you are new to the show, the point of the show, the reason the show exists is to help people who are in jobs that don't serve their soul. And this is something that's very important to me, as this was me a couple of years ago before I set up my own business. My hope is that through listening to this show, you can reframe your situation, view it as quittable, and find something that's more conducive to how you actually want to live your life, as it's too precious, too precious to do shit that you don't care about. Now, my guest today is Paul Lawford. Paul lives in a tiny home, which he built himself, and has since created a business that helps other people build tiny homes. In this discussion, you will hear us talk about how he built his first tiny home without any prior knowledge, what made him hand in his notice to leave his job that he didn't connect with, how living with less has changed his relationship to money and possessions, and how he battled the classic imposter syndrome when launching this business. The thing I love about Paul's story is that despite its uniqueness, you can definitely apply his business and life learnings to whatever situation you're currently in. So kick back, relax, and enjoy the episode. You're a guy who I've admired for a long time. Seriously, I've seen you on Instagram whipping up the tiny homes, posting about it. I love the message. I love what it stands for. Tiny homes are just fucking cool, man. I think they're great. And yeah, I'm excited to get into this because I think your story is one that genuinely will inspire people.
Thanks very much. Yeah. So yes, I live in a tiny house and I built that tiny house. My business is building tiny houses, or at the moment it's building a tiny house. And then I teach people how to build their own homes and run short courses here. So it's good crack. I love it.
So let's just assume everyone doesn't know what a tiny home is. Let's just explain to get started with what the hell is one of those things.
Yeah, I mean it's it's in the name really, like a tiny home, and mine in particular is a tiny house on wheels. So tiny home is generally considered to be any dwelling that's like under 1,000 square foot. Like mine's way less than that. Like mine's about 180 square foot. Mine's like totally off grid eco home. So I made it as close to passive as I could. So it's totally airtight. It's solar powered. It's got a mechanical heat recovery ventilation. Basically, it's just taking a regular house and squeezing it down into a very small size. The unique thing with mine is obviously that it's on wheels. So my house can be towed by my Jeep, you could just hitch it up and drive away. And basically the buzz of that is you don't need to own land. So like I spent roughly 30 grand on my tiny house about 4 years ago in materials, did most of the labor myself, had some help, didn't do the solar system myself. A friend did that, but he did it for less than market value. And we used a lot of secondhand stuff, like all my windows and doors are secondhand. Most of my solar tech was secondhand. The steel cladding that I got was from an old cattle shed that came off the ground. So there were some savings in that, but all in all, I spent about 30 grand, and now I live on a family's land. Like they let me live there in exchange for, well, pretty much for free. Like I give them power off my solar system, but they don't really expect anything in return. They just like what I'm doing. So I've landed on my feet there. I've been very lucky. So yeah, that's the crack.
So when you were starting this, like, did you get some sort of manual, or did you just say, right, I like the look of these things, I've seen them online, let's just wing this and see if I can put one together?
Yeah, it's kind of a long, convoluted story, but I suppose we'll probably get into that. But like more or less, like, so, and I'm part of the driver in me doing it was that basically the internet has democratized information so much that it actually felt possible to do without the construction experience. Like I didn't have construction experience, but I did have a wealth of project management. Now my project management experience was relevant to events. Like I'd worked in events for over a decade, but there's definitely parallels. It's really just getting things done, and yeah, I mean, I bought a book. It was absolutely crap. It was called The Idiot's Guide to Building a Tiny House, which I thought should be absolutely perfect, but it was shit. Funnily enough, like it was totally useless. Like, I should have put the thing in the bin. I bought an ebook or two one of them was in particular was really good. I lifted some designs from that, and then most of it just came from YouTube and Googling stuff and looking at people argue on the internet over what is the best way to do things. Like the unique thing about tiny houses is that they're so small that the level of engineering in them isn't overly complex. Like it's not like trying to, like a conventional house is so big that there is very complex engineering and loads involved, where like the roof in my tiny house only weighs a couple of 100 kilos. you know, it's not the most complex design in the world.
Yeah. What I love about that is the fact that you were just like, yeah, you know, I'll just try out these things, test it out on YouTube, see what's going on, and then just kind of go
What
for it.
could possibly go wrong? You know?
That's so
Yeah,
good,
there's
man.
many sleepless nights.
So how long did it take to build?
It took me about 1,000 hours over 4 months to build the shell. Like, so that, like, when I moved into it, it was basically just a shell, like a ladder to get up to the loft to bed, and a really basic kitchen. And then since then, I've built out like a stairs, some cabinetry, a much better kitchen, and done loads of finishing details and stuff. But it was perfectly livable after those 1,000 hours, you know. I've no idea how much time I put into it after that, because like the basic construction of it was a lot easier than the finish work. Like, finish carpentry requires a lot more precision and skill than rough construction. Like, the difference between really skilled people doing rough construction and unskilled people is that skilled people can get through it in like days of what would take me weeks, you know?
Yeah. Do you have a bathroom in it?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
do you,
Yeah,
do
of
you,
course I do. Yeah, I've got a
is that a
bathroom and a
silly
shower,
question?
yeah. No, it's not. I suppose it's not. But yeah, it's got a dry composting toilet and a shower, and I use propane for gas. Like, I've got an instant hot water boiler, so that does the kitchen sink and the shower.
So once you've got this and a car that it can attach onto, you can head anywhere, right?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't suggest attaching it to a Nissan Micra. You probably want something with a bit of towing power like a Jeep. But and I have towed it. Like, it's not. I wouldn't say it's the most fun thing to tow in the world, but obviously the stakes are high when you're kind of towing your life
Yeah.
savings down the road. But
Yeah.
yeah, like, it does tow. It doesn't tow easy because it's a lot of weight. Like, it's 3.5 tons, so you want to be doing it early in the morning or late at night when there's not much on the roads and the wind is low. Wouldn't suggest moving it in the winter, like, because it's very tall. Like, it's 4 meters tall. Like, the dimensions of mine, it's 6 meters or 20 foot long. It's 2.5 meters wide, and it's nearly 4 meters tall, which is really tall. Like, if you look at a truck
Chunky.
driving down the motorway, that's generally 4 meters tall. They're usually 4 meters tall.
What's it like driving it? Do you have to go at like 2 miles an hour? We interrupt this broadcast to ask for a quick favor. If you are in any way remotely finding any value from this podcast, please consider leaving me a follow on whatever place that you are getting your podcasts. And if you really love it, please give us a 5-star review, as it really helps in this early stage of growth. Thanks.
Yeah, you don't want to be going much more than like 30 or 40 miles an hour. You want to be going slow. The chances of the thing tipping over are very, very slim. Like, there's a 350 kilo lead acid battery in mine. It's sitting right on the axles. It's a low loader chassis. There's a lot of weight basically pinning it to the road, and the low loader chassis gives it a lovely low center of gravity. But like, I think, like, after the first time I moved it, I was like, the next time that happens, I'm paying someone else to do it, and I'm taking a sleeping tablet, and I just don't want to be involved in the process. Just
Yeah.
wake me up when it's done. Because like, in fairness, at that stage, I had just built the house. I was completely burnt out. I was in bits, and to see it all going down the road was extremely tense. Do you know what I mean? Because and plus, like,
Right.
my engineering had never been tested. Like, I'm an absolute spoofer here, building this thing off YouTube and stuff, and I'm like, will this actually work? Do you know what I mean? Like, are the wheels gonna come off while it's driving down the road? Which incidentally they did, and it hit the deck. But you know,
It did.
yeah. So I had a TV crew filming me because there was a production company pitching a show to RTE, lads I used to work with in Joe.ie. And basically, like, I put 1,000 hours in over those 4 months. So I was working absolutely insane hours, burning on at both ends, got total tunnel vision, totally neglecting like nutrition and sleep. And the wheels of the trailer, I'd be taking on and off the whole time, because generally don't leave them on when you're building, because like they're just in the way of they could get damaged. In addition to that, like, my parents are there, the production crew are there, so they're filming. So my last 24 hours, these lads are filming in the warehouse. I can't even be using tools. I can't be making noise. So I just neglected to check my wheel nuts at the right torques. So we're driving down the road. We're like fucking 5 kilometers from where the thing was built, and I just see a wheel go flying up the wrong side of the road.
No.
Whole trailer hit the deck, and everyone's like, "Oh no!" I get out of the van, and I'm like, "Oh no!" Like, half the house is on the ground. I'm obviously having a meltdown. Like, imagine you've just been to 3 festivals back to back. That's how I felt. That's how high my
Yeah.
emotions were. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And literally the worst thing I could possibly have imagined happening has happened. We're all running around looking, because one wheel we saw go off, but there's 2 wheels on each side, so we had lost another wheel, like, we didn't even know where. One of the camera crew found that, so he's there shooting this wheel in a bush, and he's got no one to like pan to get a reaction from, so he's like, oh no. Luckily we broke down outside a mechanic's house that one of my mates knew, so we're banging on his door. It's like 8 a.m. on a Monday morning, and we're like, get your forklift now. And we had it back in the road and moving within like half an hour, I'd say. Thankfully the lads that were helping me were all over it and very calm, where I was not. But yeah, it was like the worst moment ever. You know, it was like it's all gone wrong. Like in retrospect, it's just a nice lesson in paying attention to detail and double checking things. And to be honest, it was a nice engineering test because the house is very heavy. It hit the deck, and like you'd never know. There's nothing out of place. There was nothing,
Amazing.
nothing wrong. No windows broken, anything. So in the end, it was fine. But yeah, it was a tense few moments.
I love the idea. I mean, I think everyone can probably relate to this. We've all seen like the images on Instagram of people in the middle of like, you know, Switzerland or Ireland or somewhere beautiful, and they've got this tiny home and they're making their little cup of tea and they're chilling, you know. It's but that story definitely does not sound like that picturesque picture. But I'm glad you got it sorted anyway. So at this point, when you were getting filmed and you were post-build, was this more so to document your journey, or was this more so then, right, I'm going to try and maybe make this how I earn a living as well?
Well, the filming was basically, we felt like there was a show in it because like a guy leaving the city to go live in the countryside is an often interesting story, and then to build your own house with no previous construction experience is something some people do, but it's completely ridiculous really, and could make for good TV. But these guys started like making this pitch to RTE, or to an unnamed TV company, we'll say, an unnamed Irish TV company, early on in the process of me building the house. They were extremely slow to come back, as they tend to be. Like they weren't exactly on it, and they eventually said, "Yeah, let's do it." But the house was built, so I was like, "What? Well, there's nothing left to film. You know, you missed it." I had been taking a lot of video because I wanted to make a how-to series and to document the journey, but the quality of my stuff wasn't broadcast quality. And to be honest, I gave up on shooting video halfway through the build because it was another few hours every day that I just couldn't afford to spend on not the build. But in terms of running a business out of what I was doing, like, it was always something I wanted to do. I really enjoyed construction. I guess I'll go back to the start with it. Like I used to work in event management. I've been working in event management since before I left school. Like I went to a couple of raves at an early age, and I really liked rave culture. I really liked acid house culture. I thought it was a really good thing, and it was kind of the first time I really connected with myself and with the world around me and other people. So I wanted to I felt like it was a meaningful, worthwhile thing, you know, and eventually started running my own gigs. Did the first one in town when I was still in school. I think you might have heard of it.
I recall. I do
yeah,
recall.
so, and it had it all for me, you know what I mean? Like it got nearly shut down by gangsters. It got raided by the guards. The amps blew because the room was too hot at like 3:30 in the morning. My brother got arrested, got unarrested then later that day. Like it was brilliant. And I went on doing that for total chaos, and I loved it. You know, I was hooked after that. Lost all the money. The guards seized all the cash. You know, I was barely 18. I was afraid to go back to the guard station to look for my money to pay everyone. We managed to get another venue going, but it was like, I'm really sick of the high stakes nature of this. Like I'm not enjoying the risk of thousands of euro at a time. So eventually I went into more corporate event management, and within 10 years from running that first rave, I was running like outdoor parties for some of the biggest tech companies in the world with hundreds of thousands of euros of budget, and just insane events really. Like it's kind of the highest you can get with doing that corporate stuff, and it was fun. It was a really fun way to make money, and the company I was with in particular were a very cool company that treat their staff well. Like, but there was still something missing for me. Like it just wasn't, I knew I didn't want to do that forever, and I had been killing myself working at it and getting myself to a good position in my career, that eventually I had enough money saved to buy a house, like, or to have my deposit for a house to get a mortgage. But at that point, I was really unimpressed with what was on offer, like the quality of housing in Dublin, which is where I wanted to buy, and just the insane cost. And then the whole concept of a mortgage was something I found very hard to swallow. Like it just seems like madness to me. I think I understand after, now that I own a home, be it a really small one, how banks get away with getting people to pay for mortgages, because like having a house of your own is absolutely amazing. But ultimately, like if somebody offered you a car at like 30%, basically, that like you're going to pay an extra 30% the value of that car over the next 20 years, you'd be like, absolutely not. Like this is the worst deal ever. Why would I do that? But it's just accepted as the norm for mortgages. But I thought there must be a better way to do this, albeit one with a bit of sacrifice in terms of space. So that was how I ended up thinking of the tiny house thing.
So it was kind of bred out of you wanting to leave Dublin, and then or was it more that you were just not a fan of maybe delving into this mortgage thing, and you didn't really feel like that was the right move for you?
it wasn't even wanting to leave Dublin. Like one major driver in it was pragmatism with the sheer expense of having to pay a mortgage basically, and then
Yeah.
the other huge driver in it for me was sustainability and environmentalism. So at that stage in my career, and I was feeling more and more disillusioned with working in corporate events. At this stage, I'd moved to a media company, and yeah, I just wasn't. I felt like I was putting in a lot of effort, but like ultimately the end goal here is that we're kind of entertaining people for a short amount of time. And when it came to the events I started out working at, it would have been festivals and rave culture and stuff like that. And I've had some of the best experiences of my life at those events and made some lifelong connections. I feel there's real value in those, whereas the higher end of events is basically marketing. It is just marketing, or else it's employee retention for massive companies. And it's like, I don't really feel like what I'm doing here is that important, like, and I hate to say that because there's so many people I know that work in those industries and it's a really fun way to make money, but I felt like I needed to do more basically for the environment, for the planet at large. And basically I found myself doing a short course in Clough in this eco village. So there's this amazing eco village in Clough, which is where I am right now, and I was really impressed by it. It's this 67-acre site that about 30 people or more got together in the 90s, and they basically wanted to build a better life and to show people how they could live more sustainably. So instead of buying their own houses individually across the country, they bought this singular site and they basically built their own village. And then they built all these unique houses, and the village has like its own forest. It's got its own farm that feeds half the people here. It's got allotments to grow your own food. It's even got an amphitheater and even when I arrived 4 years ago, and they're about 18 years into their project, like the place was just incredible. Like it's this verdant green, amazing place with such strong community roots, kids milling around everywhere, like free range kids basically just having the crack. And I was really inspired by what I saw basically. So I was like, I decided, like I handed in my notice during that course. Like I decided then and there, like I have to do something like these people have done. Like I have to put my efforts behind something that I feel can actually help people and make a difference. So that was when I got out of the events and started moving towards this. So I was doing it out of pragmatism, but I was also very strongly trying to change how I was spending my time and basically where my resources, the only thing I can really control is my output, and what that output is going behind. Is it going behind keeping somebody employed at a major tech company, or is it going behind helping people live their lives in a way that I think might be better for them and for the planet, you know?
What you just said, I think, is probably going to land with so many people, that feeling of like, hey, look, I like the thing I'm doing. It ticks a lot of boxes for me. It's like financially sound. It's fun, bit of crack. I like the people I work with, but you just don't have that sort of sense of purpose with it, or you don't necessarily feel great about it. And you think to yourself, okay, long term, at what point do I kind of pack this in, or is this just the thing I do now forever? I feel like you just have to reach that tipping point. So yeah, take me through what happens then after you leave and you build this. At what point then do you start teaching courses on it, and how does that kind of come into the picture?
Yeah, so I mean, there was a huge gap between that. Between me handing in my notice and me starting work in the tiny house was literally a couple of months. You know, I think it was August when I was handing in my notice, leaving like sunny Clough, and by June the next year, which is I don't know, whatever, 8 or 10 months, I was in a workshop in Rathdowney, pretending I knew what I was doing, sticking timber together and building my gaff. But I was about 2 years into living in it when I'd always wanted to do the courses, but I just didn't feel like I was ready. And also I needed to live in the house to verify that it was a legitimate option, you know, because I couldn't really talk a big game about tiny house living as brilliant having not done it. So I said I'd do a year in it and see after that, like as an experiment really, to see how it was. And there was a lot of other stuff involved in getting to that point. Like I had to sell half of my possessions really, because it's a tiny house. Like your stuff physically won't fit in it. That was actually a much better experience than I expected it to be. Like getting rid of superfluous stuff is actually very rewarding and feels really good. And it really changes your, without sounding like too much of a hippie about it, like it does change your relationship to consumerism. Like I can do a lap of IKEA now without filling my trolley full of stuff that's shiny that I like the look of that I absolutely don't need because I just physically don't have the space for it, you know? Similarly with clothes and stuff like that, like you just limit your stuff to how much you can cram into your tiny little space. Like you know yourself, like your possessions are kind of like a gas, like they just fill the available space that you have, and before you know it, you've just got a bunch of shit you never use filling up space. So, but
And anyone who's like, I mean, have you ever done like a clear out of your room and you've just thrown out 20% of the shit you own, and then all of a sudden you just feel like I feel different. It's like this thing
yeah.
is costing me to. It's like the cost of there's a cost of owning it.
It's mad that, and I can't really quantify it very well, but I have to say it felt really good getting rid of all that stuff, and I missed nothing. There was nothing I missed, like, do you know what I mean? There was no point. And like when I arrived at my house, like I had 2 gym bags of clothes, some cooking equipment, a surfboard, hilariously living completely inland in Tipperary, and a couple of instruments. Like I'd so little, and I've filled my house with so much shit since then that I definitely
Yeah.
need to cull. But like, yeah, I never wanted for anything that I'd gotten rid of. Surprisingly, like, I thought it would be much more difficult than it was, and I was pretty cutthroat about it. And yeah, it felt great. But I was living in the house 2 years basically before I could kind of worked up the confidence to really start to push the courses and to start pushing selling tiny houses. So
At this point, people had seen you, right? You know, they'd seen you do it and you'd posted about it. And so there was sort of a proof of concept there.
there was a proof of concept, and I'd been doing slow marketing between Instagram, my website, and general word of mouth, with people getting on to me and stuff. Like marketing is probably my weakest point in my business. Like I'm crap at it, and I struggle to I struggle to change gears. Is probably one of my hardest things. Like it's very hard. I find it hard to jump between a construction worker, project manager, graphic designer, and then get to the marketing. And to be honest, the marketing is the one that I always just push to the end and ignore, which is madness for a young business. But I was also constantly working on the house in the background and constantly refining what I was doing, to the point where eventually I was getting I got emailed a lot for people looking for quotes rather than me outbounding it too much. But eventually I got to a point where I was happy to to make an offering that I thought was competitive with what else was in the market, and something I could really stand over. And similarly with the courses, I felt I was finally at a stage. Like I ran a course after 1 year. It was really a test run to see how it would work, and the people got a lot out of it. And it was actually one of the students from that course, who's a friend, that approached me and was like, "You need to do that more. Like I kind of." Like if you want to talk about imposter syndrome, like not feeling like you deserve to be in the position is one thing, but like literally pretending to be a carpenter is a whole other level of imposter syndrome, you know?
How did you manage that? How did you manage that feeling of feeling like you weren't good enough?
Yeah, I still struggle to be honest, but it was other people. Strangely, it was other people. I think I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I'm an extremely harsh self-critic. So if anything's less than perfect with the work that I do, I really don't like it, and I try and fix it. That really doesn't bode well for an amateur. You know what I mean? Like you just can't do perfect carpentry when you're new at it, you know. So, but it did help me to get better at my trade and to get better at it. But running that test course and helping people out on their smaller projects, and those people then approaching me and really telling me like that really, really, really helped them. Like they got so much out of that, was what really pushed me on to do it. And people were really starting to request the courses. And since we've started running them, the feedback has been phenomenal, and it's like people have said like it's changed the course of their life. Like this is going to have such a profound effect on them, which sounds crazy me saying it now, but I mean, I did a short course. It wasn't particularly the content of the course that changed my life, but it was coming here and seeing this place. So yeah, that was really empowering. And I think also like we're not showing people, like you can't really expect to get that much out of a 3-day construction weekend. We're really just showing people how they can go and then teach themselves really, and pushing them in the right direction and trying to equip them with the confidence to go and buy power tools, to start looking at YouTube videos and follow a similar path. Because I think one of the most interesting things I've learned is that like you don't need anyone's permission, relatively speaking, to do the thing that you want to do. You know what I mean? Like obviously there is, planning permission for things like houses and other such things. And obviously having a qualification, having a degree, having done an apprenticeship, all that stuff is going to help. But you don't need anyone's permission to just go for it, basically, and that was something that took me a long time to get my head around and to kind of really own and feel okay about, which was really surprising to me, and might sound surprising considering what I did was such a head the ball thing to go and do without any previous construction experience. But
dude, it just goes to show, like, and you hear this from everyone who's like started something, everyone just feels like they don't know what they're doing anyway, and everyone's kind of just winging it.
Everyone is winging it, everyone is blagging it. And I think there's a level of blagging where you're really, really good at blagging because you've got a PhD in the thing that you're blagging about, but you are still blagging. Like everyone is just blagging. And I think getting really to a really advanced place in event management really showed me that, because I was like, everyone is just blagging here. I had a friend who's been a very successful pilot, and he's like, you'd want to see the cowboy stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and I'm like, what? Some of the stories he tells me. Another guy that works at a high level of motor racing, and again, it's like, it's total cowboy shit, and it's like, are all of these industries just people completely blagging and winging it? Like, you seem like a complete idiot or a lunatic until you actually pull off the thing, and then it's like, yeah, you totally successfully blagged it, so there's a lot to be said for it.
And it's just so easy to look at your Instagram feed and just see this guy, that guy, entrepreneur, oh, she's doing this. And then you're like, oh, well, they've got their shit together. They don't. they never do. They have the same imposter syndrome as you and I certainly do. And I think especially at the beginning, right? That's just a part of it. You're just going to be doubting yourself until you have, at least in your case, right? You had some degree of proof that came your way with people messaging you and saying, hey, look, this actually changed my life. And then that like sort of self-fulfilling thing where you get that feedback and you're like, okay, well, now I can go to the next level, or maybe I can keep going.
Yeah. That external validation, although you should not need it, it did really help, because I think something I was terrified to do was to lead anyone astray or to be a charlatan, because unfortunately, as I talk about, everyone is blagging it and that you should be confident to just blag it a certain amount yourself. There are also a ton of charlatans out there, and everybody is using every platform now to absolutely sell you something and tell you that this is absolutely the right way to do something. And I think our generation and successive generations in particular do need to just gain a new level of media literacy, where you need to be able to somewhat spot the bullshit and spot the people that are kind of doing it for the wrong reasons, I suppose, or to sell you something. But like there is a fine line between that and amateurs. Like I am an amateur construction worker telling you how you should do things.
In the same way, man, I am an amateur entrepreneur telling people that, hey, look, you can change your life and kind of get out of a 9 to 5. But I mean, if I look at my own position, like I'm sort of qualified to tell somebody who's like a year and a half, 2 years behind me, right? I've been in the shoes of somebody who was in a job they absolutely hated, and now 2 years later I'm not, and I'm very flexible now. I'm very flexible in the same way you a couple of years ago didn't really know what you were doing. To Paul 2 years ago, you're now an expert.
Something interesting that happened, like we were running a build course at the weekend, and I was walking away from the group that I was coaching to grab something from the workshop, and I went past one of the other groups, and there's two women, and they were saying, do you want to cut this piece of timber, or shall I? And she goes, oh no, I don't want to do it, I'm just going to mess it up. I had to stop and turn around and go, like, that's the whole point of you being here. Like, do it, mess it up. Like, you can mess this up as many times as you want, 'cause this is a total training run. But I take that just fear of screwing it up, and that was so low stakes. It's like, you know, there's like your whole point, you're here to learn, like your whole point is to screw this up, like. And I think that's just generally a good piece of advice, is that you're going to fuck shit up nonstop all the time, and you kind of just need to get used to that and own it. And making mistakes and screwing things up is just part of the course, and it's always going to happen. You're going to mess stuff up with your clients and your suppliers and everyone across the board. How you recover from those mistakes is really more so what defines you, making up for it and making it work for the people in the end, you know?
Do you think we should almost get better at just recovering from mistakes rather than trying to prevent them?
I think preventative measures are definitely good, but only because, like, coming from an event management background where, like, we didn't always take enough preventative measures, and then things would go in the shit, and you'd be like,
sure,
how this could have so easily been avoided. But I think it's just inevitable that mistakes are going to happen. Things are going to get delayed. Things are going to go wrong. Like, we're all humans. We make errors all the time. It is totally inevitable. I don't like this kind of dogma of pretending that you're always correct all the time. And I don't really care when suppliers let me down if they apologize and they say, this is how we're going to sort it. I have a major issue with people that don't own their mistakes, that don't really flag that the issue happened or make any kind of amends by sorting it out. Like, I won't work with people. I'll try to avoid working with people again that do that.
Couldn't agree more. It's just a certain degree of respect, isn't it? When you're working with somebody, you're dealing with somebody, something goes wrong, just hold your hand up. Hey, that was me. Sorry. So going back to tiny homes and your mission with that, right? I was on your website and I saw that your mission with tiny homes is to help people to build better lives, right? And I want to get your perspective on, why is life better in a tiny home? We interrupt this broadcast to provide you with something free. If you are liking what we are doing here and would like to hear more about what we're learning, please go over to quittable.me, pop your email in, and I will send you 1 email per week. Promise, no spam. Cheers.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think ultimately it's the financial freedom, which is interesting because of where you've got to in your journey as well, you know. But I think, like, a tiny house, like I spent 30 grand on mine, you'd probably want to predict to spend more like 40 grand on one for yourself, because, you know, you could put the labor down to about 30% of the cost. But, you know, if you got a place sorted for yourself to live for 40 grand instead of, you know, 200 to 400 grand, like, that can completely change your life. Do you know what I mean? That means you can go back to college. That means you can completely change the career. That means you're not going to be dependent on whatever job that you might feel stuck in, because all of a sudden that changes. It means you could, like, travel the world with that money that you've saved. You know what I mean? I think that's the ultimate way I see a change in people's lives. And then I also just think that, particularly in Ireland, like, from the like it's just so hard to move out of home for a lot of people now, and I think tiny houses in particular are a great solution for people that are aged from like 19 or 20 up until you're kind of in your mid 30s to 40s, because it's that stage in your life that you really do need to leave home. You do really do need to develop as a person, and that can be really difficult when you're living in your parents' gaff. If you're lucky, obviously, if you're lucky enough to be able to live at home, fantastic. But I think this presents a completely new model for where you live at what stage in your life.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it in when I asked that question. I was thinking more like in the way of connecting with nature and getting you outdoors, which is definitely a huge part of it as well. But it's interesting to think of the actual financial implications of that and what that can potentially open up for somebody, whether it's going back to college or just traveling more or whatever.
It just leaves more time and more space for the things that you want in your life, basically. And then there is a connection to nature that's much stronger if you're somewhere green and lovely, and because you're going to spend more time outdoors because your house is really small and you're only going to get out of it from time to time. And then just having less things connects you to what matters to you. Like it kind of forces you to choose what matters in your life more in a healthy way.
Where have you seen that show up in your life?
Like I said earlier, like getting rid of all of my superfluous for possessions. Now I've just got a couple of instruments, the few clothes that I need, and I think one of the most surprising things from living in the tiny house has been how much it's changed my relationship with money and my attitude toward money, because I was used to making a decent salary, but also spending a lot of that money. Like the money would come in, it would go on rent and just general living expenses so quickly. And now if I make the same in a month as I made back then, like it's staying in my account. Like it's not going back out and it's becoming savings. It's a hard thing to explain. I feel like it has to just kind of be felt, but it did really change my attitude towards money and its value.
What I think you've touched on there is the fact that you're doing something and it's not necessarily primarily driven by money, and it's almost like it's bringing you away from money. And like, yes, of course, you're now building a business that can keep food on the table. And when people leave a job or when they're thinking about leaving a job, all they can think, and I thought this was, oh, but I had a lovely income coming in there. That was, how am I going to ever get that back again? But what I found is when you are forced to be resourceful, you can be very resourceful. And you realize that, hey, look, that extra 500 quid I was spending on this or that a month you don't really need it.
No, not at all. I mean, it's said on every podcast ever, but getting out of your comfort zone is actually really, really good for your self-development, it turns out. And like, I think having absolutely no money for a short amount of time really drove me to push the business on as well. Like I needed to be really broke for a while to get really hungry again, to really go for it and start working like a lunatic again,
Yeah, when there's no real risk present, it matters a bit less, and then all of a sudden when you up the stakes, then you find a different gear, right? And you just kind of have to. I just kind of go back to one of the things you said earlier about like marketing as a weak point for you, and this is just a business related question. Like, what in doing this have been one of the biggest business lessons you have learned?
Good one. I think one of the biggest business lessons I learned is that you really need to stick to your plans and prioritize. Like there are parts of this business and this job that I really love, like the construction side of it, and it's kind of quite easy for me to spend 12 hours a day just building stuff because I love doing it. But that's also a problem because I will spend the 12 hours a day building stuff completely at the cost of marketing or getting back to people or the more important stuff. So you kind of have to eat the frog in the morning and just get the thing you don't want to do out of the way. Now, I'm giving advice that I don't exactly always follow, but I'm getting better at it, and that's all I can hope for. I do really struggle with changing gears, so that whole thing of wearing many hats, and I can get stuck into a mode, and I tend to be quite singularly focused, and being able to spin multiple plates is definitely, especially at this stage of my business, because I don't have the resources to outsource things yet. Do you know what I mean? Like the first thing I'm going to do when I have the resources to outsource something is dump the marketing on someone so that I don't have to do that, because it's my least favorite job. But I'll still have to keep an eye on it. But yeah, I think that would be one of the biggest things that I struggle with, or one of the biggest lessons I've learned. And then I think I've always believed in this, but I do believe in transparency as much as possible. You know, there's always an element with clients facing events when we were doing that like everything is absolutely perfect and you don't need to worry about anything. And it was more that they just don't see the chaos behind the scenes of the people running around screaming, making sure it all happens. But I think when you genuinely fuck up, or even when something has just gone awry or wrong, that you just own it and you tell people that this is the crack and this is what you're doing to solve that. And no one ever doesn't appreciate that. Somebody might be disappointed in the moment that something hasn't gone exactly to plan, but it's better than them finding out after the fact that something's gone completely awry. And I think being transparent with your clients and your suppliers is a really nice way to work, and it just makes everybody feel like they're on the level and that there's a certain level of respect.
I mean, I've certainly felt that in the game of property, which is where I kind of segued out of working in a sales role. And, you know, let's just say there's a lot of people fending for themselves in there who maybe don't act as ethically as you might hope them to. And it's just hard to ever want to work with someone like that, you know, and you can almost sense it from them a mile off when it's not there. And when somebody is authentic and they are very accountable and hold their hand up, you can sense that. And so, yeah, you just sort of gravitate towards people like that a lot more. What's something that you're learning right now?
Balance, I suppose. How to take breaks is something I've famously been crap at. I don't know. I think I've been lucky to be afforded some really great opportunities from a young age where I was always kind of punching above my weight in the jobs that I was getting. But that was kind of like, I worked over capacity for like ever in events because I was constantly lucky enough to get to a better position in my job. But it was also like, I really have to like utilize this opportunity and show that I've earned it, you know. But that did just mean like my whole life was focused on work for a very, very long time. And I do find that I do that again, and that I have to force myself to take time off. I have to force myself to take breaks, and ultimately it's a better long-term strategy. And I talk to one of my best mates, Julie, about this all the time, that like we tend to be such unhealthy binge workers. Like you just work extremely hard for a really long time, and then you're like, why am I so tired all the time? Why am I so wrecked? It's like you haven't stopped. Like you haven't stopped for years. Like you haven't taken a half day properly. You're not eating properly. You're not exercising. Like you're not looking after yourself. And I feel like I'm getting a lot better at that, but it's still a challenge, and it's still something I need to learn to do better.
Yeah, you know, you're working the whole time, and sometimes you just got to ask yourself, wait, hang on a minute. I am working to get this, but what do I want to do to fill my other time with as well? It's not just, your life shouldn't be just linear in that way and just sticking to one thing. But
that, and as boring as it sounds, like you do just get diminishing returns. So I hate to turn taking time off into a productivity hack, but like it is, do you know what I mean? Like if you burn yourself out, then you're just producing crap work, and it's taking you longer to produce the crap work than if you just actually take a rest when you need it and actually look after yourself a bit more, you know?
What would you say to somebody who's maybe considering getting into tiny homes? Like, what would you say is maybe some of the cons? Because we've obviously talked about like the pros and how it's great, and you're a guy who's very openly transparent about things. So, like, what would you say are the downsides to getting into it?
To getting into a tiny house in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I suppose like space is the big one, and like when I talk about tiny houses, like I really envisage them as for one person per tiny house. You know, like I'm at a stage where I'm in a relationship now, and a long distance relationship. So my girlfriend would come and stay with me in the tiny house, but like we can get on top of each other in there, and like we've both agreed like it's totally unfeasible for Kat to move into the tiny house. You know, that's just not gonna that's not gonna be good for the relationship. So I think, I don't know if it's hard to call that a drawback, because I think you do need to look at them as a per person thing. Another difficulty is, you know, finding somewhere to put it. That is the major drawback, and that is the biggest barrier to people getting them. Like I get an email every 2 weeks from someone saying, I'm ready to do this, but what's the crack with planning? How do I put this? How do I get somewhere to put it? And unfortunately, I can't really too publicly advertise, just say, just go for it. You know, I can't.
Yeah.
It's too dangerous for me to tell someone to do that. They're like, I'll tell someone in the pub that, I'll tell a friend that, but I can't publicly say, give that advice from my like official website, or, you know, I've just, you know, you have to take that risk with open eyes, and it be your decision and not some person on the internet telling you to do it. But other than that, like I don't have many. It's hard for me to think about what's bad about them, you know.
I think there's a lot of people who are listening. I mean, I know myself from being in, let's say, the tech world. You're in sales or whatever. You look at lives like that are more simple. It's very attractive. It's definitely very attractive. And honestly, from speaking to you, I think a lot of people are going to be like moved by your story, because you've saw something, you've kind of identified it, you've just said, fuck it, I'm going to just give it a go. You looked at a bit of information, you winged it, you felt your imposter syndrome, and now you're kind of just making your way from it. It's so cool. And not only just that, the thing itself is so cool. And if anyone has never stayed in a tiny home, go on Airbnb right now and book one, because they're very, very cool. Yeah, man, it's been great to have a chat with you. I've really, really enjoyed this.
Yes, you too, man. I've really enjoyed it. So thanks a lot for giving me the shout, and keep it lit. I'm loving the podcast.
Hell yeah, man. So if people want to go and check out a build course with you, and if they want to maybe come and work with you or build one themselves, where should they go?
They can go to my website, and that would be amazing. Yeah, smallchange.ie. So yeah, do please reach out if you've got any questions. You can find me on Instagram at the Small Change Movement too. But feel free to shoot me an email if you're on the fence of doing it. If you're on the edge of doing this, then give me a shout, and we can have a chat about it, and I can hopefully point you in the right direction.
Hell yeah, brother. All right, man. Well, great to have you on. Chat soon.
Chat soon, man.